Have you ever seen a general cry like a child? I have. I saw decorated men begging for their mothers. I watched heroes fall apart from a single touch. This is the side of war they never show, the forbidden side. Buried beneath bandages, blood, and silence, I was a nurse. I didn't go to war to fight, but I was forced to witness what war really does to a man's soul. In this diary, hidden for decades, are the truths no history book dares to tell. If you think you know what war looks like, wait until you hear what I saw. Subscribe, not for me, but for them. For the generals who cried when no one was watching, for the soldiers who never made it home, for the stories the world tried to forget. If their pain deserves to be remembered, then this story deserves to be heard. Subscribe and carry their memory forward. Imagine the moment when everything you've ever known crumbles. When you step into a world you can't even begin to understand, and suddenly everything feels alien. That's exactly what happened to me. I was just a nurse, a woman from a small town in America, raised with the simple dream of helping others. But then the war came, and nothing would ever be the same again. The first time I saw a soldier, his body barely holding together, blood seeping through his uniform, was when it truly hit me. We weren't in some sanitized hospital back home anymore. I was on the front lines, and I was expected to help them, heal them. But how could I heal the broken pieces of someone who had already lost so much? I wasn't ready for it. None of us were. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and blood, a mix I'd never imagined would be my reality. The faces of these men were etched with fear, their eyes wide with panic, their bodies trembling. But it wasn't just the physical wounds that shook me, it was their souls. Each man who walked through those hospital doors carried a piece of his humanity already shattered. Some came with missing limbs, others with wounds so severe there was no hope of saving them. But there were others, too. Men who had seen horrors beyond imagination, seen their brothers die, watched their entire world burn to the ground. And they were trying to hold it all in, trying to be strong. And there, amidst the chaos, I stood, in over my head, trying to keep them alive, trying to help them breathe one more breath. But at that moment, I wasn't just saving lives, I was fighting a war within myself too. Every scream, every agonized plea from those soldiers, it was as if the war was being carved into my soul. I couldn't leave it behind. It followed me. And soon, I realized there was no escaping it. That morning, June 6, 1944, it felt like any other. I had no idea how the world was about to change forever. There was no warning. No one could have prepared me for what would come crashing down on us like a tidal wave. I remember the sound of the boats hitting the sand, the first wave of soldiers running off the boats, their rifles in hand. It was all so surreal, like a dream I couldn't wake up from. But it wasn't a dream. It was reality. And the moment those soldiers' boots touched the Normandy beach, everything became real. The air was thick with gunfire, the cries of men falling, the explosions so loud they shook your chest. And amidst the chaos, I thought I was prepared. We'd all trained for months. We were told we would see things, terrible things, but we would rise above them. But no one ever told me what it would feel like to see men who'd only just learned how to fight, how to kill, how to survive, and then watch them die. To see their faces, frozen in pain, staring up at the sky as if searching for answers that could never come. I watched them fall one by one as I scrambled to patch wounds to keep them breathing. But what could I do? What could any of us do against a force so overwhelming? It wasn't just their bodies that were wounded. Their spirits were torn to shreds, and I was helpless to fix that. For hours, it felt like we were trapped in some kind of nightmare that would never end. Each man who came through that door, barely clinging to life, was another reminder that the world we once knew was gone. And for the first time, I understood. War wasn't something you could just read about in books or watch from a distance. It wasn't a game. It was something that claimed pieces of you, pieces you could never get back. Days blurred into nights, and the faces of those soldiers, men I'd never meet again, became ghosts in my mind. I tried not to get attached, tried not to remember their names. It was a defense mechanism, I suppose, one I didn't even realize I was building. But then came the first loss that I would never forget. His name was Private James Walker, a young man with a smile that could light up any room. He was only 19, a kid who had no idea what he was getting into when he joined up. I remember him walking into the triage area, just another face in a crowd of broken men. But there was something about him, something that told me he didn't belong here. He should have been at home, somewhere safe, somewhere far away from this madness. But here he was, in front of me, his legs shattered, blood pouring out of him like a river. I did everything I could. I worked with hands that trembled, trying to stop the bleeding, trying to keep his eyes open as he whispered my name, over and over again, begging me to save him. But what could I do? What could anyone do against the brutality of what was happening to us? We didn't have the equipment, we didn't have the time. And when his eyes finally closed, it was as if the war had taken a piece of my soul with him. I can still see his face sometimes, even now. And when I close my eyes, I can still hear him whispering, "Please don't let me die here." But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't save him. He was just one of many, but he was the first one that really stuck with me. The first one that made me realize that war wasn't about soldiers fighting for a cause. It was about men fighting for survival, and most of the time, survival wasn't enough.
That moment, standing there with his body in my arms, I felt something shift deep inside me. I understood, finally, what war really did to people. It didn't just destroy the body, it took away your humanity, piece by piece. You could never go back to who you were before. And as I closed his eyes for the last time, I wondered, who would be next? And more importantly, who would be left to carry on? The days seemed to stretch endlessly. One after the other, soldiers came through, each one more broken than the last. Some were barely conscious, their faces twisted in pain, begging for the simplest of comforts. Others were too far gone, their bodies nothing more than mangled husks, unrecognizable. But it wasn't just the physical wounds that haunted me. It was the eyes. Their eyes. I had never seen fear like that before. It was raw, primal, and it burned into me every time I looked into a soldier's face. They weren't just fighting for their lives, they were fighting for something much deeper. Something inside them had already started to crumble, and I could feel it too, creeping up on me, tightening around my chest with every passing hour. We were losing. We were losing ground, losing men, losing hope. And no matter how hard we tried, no matter how much blood we spilled, it was never enough. I kept telling myself that if I just kept going, if I could just push through the next wave, the next death, maybe we could make it. But deep down, I knew the truth. The war wasn't something we could win. Not here, not now. But the real shock came when I saw the generals. Strong, commanding, unshakable. Or at least that's what we thought. I had always looked at them as leaders, icons of strength. But as I stood in that tent, surrounded by maps and battle plans,
I saw something I had never expected: a crack in their resolve. They were just as afraid as the men they led. It started with General Harrison, the one we all respected the most. He had this aura about him. His very presence demanded respect. But that day, I saw him break. His face, normally so stoic, twisted in a grimace of frustration and helplessness. And then the tears started. He didn't even try to hide them. It was as if all the weight of the war, all the lives lost, had crushed him in that moment. I didn't know what to do. I had always been the one trying to hold everything together, but now I was watching the very people we turned to for strength unravel before my eyes. And in that moment, I wondered if anyone at all could survive this war with their humanity intact. We were all being swallowed up by it. The generals, the soldiers, the nurses, none of us were immune. And I had to ask myself, how much longer could we keep fighting before we lost everything we were? It wasn't just the soldiers who broke. I learned that very quickly. The generals, the men we relied on to lead us, to give us hope. Seeing them fall apart was something I wasn't prepared for. It felt like the ground beneath us was shaking, like everything we thought we knew about strength and courage was slipping away, piece by piece. It happened during a meeting. Just another routine update, but something was different that day. The tension in the room was thick, almost suffocating. I could feel it in the air, a kind of unease that I couldn't shake. We were losing so many men. The soldiers weren't the only ones whose bodies were broken. The weight of loss was starting to take its toll on the minds of our leaders. And it showed. General Harrison, the one who had always been the symbol of unwavering strength, the one who never let his emotions show, suddenly crumbled. It was the smallest thing that set him off. A map on the table, a shift in the wind, a word spoken too loudly. But whatever it was, it broke him. He started pacing, muttering under his breath. I could see the muscles in his neck tightening, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the table. And then it happened. In front of us all, in front of every officer and soldier in the room, the tears came. No one said a word. We all just stood there, frozen, watching this man, this hero, fall apart before our eyes. I thought I would be the one to hold it together. I was just a nurse, after all, not a soldier, not a leader. But in that moment, I realized we were all just human. We were all breaking down in our own ways, each of us carrying the weight of lives lost, of things we couldn't fix. I stood there, watching General Harrison, knowing that the man who had been the foundation of our morale, the one who had kept us going, was now as broken as the soldiers we were fighting to save. I wanted to help him, to say something, but what could I say? What could any of us say? The war had already taken so much from all of us. Our bodies, our minds, our hearts. And yet, we kept pushing forward. We had to. But at that moment, I couldn't help but wonder if we would all reach a breaking point. I knew I wasn't the only one who was starting to lose myself to this war. The question now was, who would break next? The day I saw General Harrison cry, I knew something had shifted. Not just in him, but in all of us. It was as if the very foundation of what we believed about leadership, about strength, had shattered right before our eyes. I watched him, a man who had led us through countless battles, break down like a child. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. The war wasn't just destroying bodies, it was destroying the soul. It wasn't just the soldiers on the front lines who were being broken. It was the ones we trusted to lead us through it all. Those men, the ones in charge, the ones who had seen more than we could imagine, had carried the burden of it all for so long. But in the silence of that room, as I watched General Harrison's face crumple with the weight of the war, I saw it. The first crack. He didn't just lose composure. He lost hope. I think that's what struck me the most. It wasn't that he was crying, it was the rawness of it, the desperation in his eyes, as if the war had taken everything from him and left nothing but a shell of the man we had all once admired. He looked like he wanted to give up. He didn't just want to fight anymore. He wanted to forget. And I realized, in that instant, that the war had become too much for him. Too much for all of us. The soldiers, they had their moments of weakness, their screams and cries for help. But the generals, those men who were supposed to be untouchable, the ones who could never show fear, now they were showing it in front of us. They were breaking, and the walls between us and them were crumbling. In that moment, I saw the truth of war, not the medals, not the glory, but the destruction it leaves behind. It was no longer about fighting for a cause. It was about surviving, about holding on to whatever humanity we had left. And I couldn't help but wonder, as I watched him wipe his tears and try to pull himself together, how much longer could we all keep pretending? How much longer could we keep fighting for a world that was falling apart around us? Have you ever looked at someone and realized in that split second that they're no longer the person you once knew? That something inside them has shifted, broken, and there's no going back? That was the moment I understood the true cost of war. It was late one night, and I was sitting in the mess hall, alone for the first time in days. The noise from the battlefield had faded, but the tension, it was still there, thick in the air, like it would never leave. I was staring into my coffee, the steam rising from it like smoke, when Private Joe Daniels walked in. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, as though the life had been drained out of him. He looked different, not in the way a soldier looks after a battle, but in the way someone looks when... Joey'd been a good kid, just a year older than my brother back home. He was always smiling, always talking about how he couldn't wait to go back to his family. But that night, there was no trace of that optimism left in him. His shoulders slumped, and he moved like a man who had already given up on the world. I watched him sit down across from me, his hands shaking as he picked up a piece of bread, but he didn't eat. He just stared at it, his mind far away. I could feel the weight of his silence pressing down on me. And then he finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper, as if he was afraid to even hear himself. "I can't do it anymore, Maggie," he said, his words cutting through the stillness of the room. "I don't want to fight anymore. I don't want to see any more of them die." I wanted to tell him everything would be okay. I wanted to reassure him, to pull him out of the abyss he was sinking into. But I couldn't, because I felt it too. The same dark emptiness that was slowly consuming Joe was starting to seep into me too. We were all being consumed by it. The weight of this war slowly strangling whatever humanity we had left. And in that moment, I realized something that shook me to the core. There was no going back. We had all been changed, irreparably. The war had taken more from us than we could ever have imagined. Not just our bodies, not just our friends, but our very souls. And I wasn't sure if we could ever get them back. As I watched Joe walk out of the room, head hanging low, I wondered, who else was on the edge like him? Who else had already broken but was too afraid to admit it? And more terrifying still, how close was I to that point myself? There's a certain kind of silence that comes with surviving something that should have killed you. It's not the quiet you expect. No, it's deeper. It's the silence that comes from the space inside you that is left hollow, echoing with everything you've witnessed, everything you've lost. I should have been used to it by now. I had patched up so many wounds, stopped so much bleeding, held so many hands as they slipped away. But the truth is, no one prepares you for what happens when you live while others die. You're left with the weight of it, the guilt of living when so many didn't. I remember the first time I saw Sergeant Michael Dunn after he came back from the front. He had been gone for weeks, and the stories we heard weren't good. We thought he was dead. But when he walked into the hospital that day, it was like he had crawled out of a grave. His eyes were wild, his face pale, his body thinner than I remembered. He didn't speak at first, He just stood there, as if unsure of where he was or who he was anymore. I walked up to him, and when he looked at me, I saw it. The same thing I had seen in Joe's eyes, in every soldier I had helped save. He had seen the worst of it, and it had taken something from him that he'd never get back. I asked him what happened out there. He didn't say much, just that they had been pinned down in a trench for days, with no food, no water, no chance of escape. He said that when it finally ended, he was the only one left. The rest of his squad was gone, every single one of them. The hardest part, he told me, was that he didn't know why he was still alive. "Why didn't I die with them, Maggie?" he asked, his voice raw, like the very act of speaking was pulling him apart. Why did I make it through when they didn't? I didn't have an answer. How could I? Who could ever answer that? Why do some survive when others don't? What kind of fate is that? It was a question I couldn't shake for days. Because, in a way, I was asking myself the same thing. Why had I survived when so many others didn't? Why was I still here trying to heal the broken when I was just as broken as they were? We carry the weight of survival every day, but it's not the kind of weight anyone can see. It's the kind that settles deep inside, in places no one can touch. And as much as we try to move forward, to continue on, we're always carrying it with us. Have you ever reached the point where you're not sure if you're still alive or just going through the motions? I can't even remember when it happened, but somewhere along the way I stopped feeling. Not in the way people stop caring, but in the way your body learns to survive after you've seen too much. Your heart keeps beating, your lungs keep breathing, but something in you goes numb. I thought I would find solace in the routine, the simple things, like changing bandages, administering morphine, or cleaning wounds. These things didn't require me to feel anything. They were tasks, mechanical, lifeless. But even they became harder to do as the days wore on and as the faces of the men blurred together in my mind. They all started to look the same hollow eyes, the same pleas for help, the same faces twisted in pain. But then, there was a moment that broke through the numbness. It happened one night when I was walking through the ward, my feet dragging across the cold concrete floor, lost in thought. I heard a soft cry, a voice, weak and desperate. It was coming from the far corner of the tent where we kept the most critically wounded. At first, I hesitated. It was just another soldier, I thought. Just another man begging for help, another broken soul with no hope left. But something in his voice made me stop. Something made me turn toward him. When I approached the bed, I found Corporal Thomas Blake, a young man with an unmistakable Southern accent. He was barely conscious, his face pale, his body covered in burns. His eyes locked onto mine. And for a second, I thought I saw something in them. Something I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I just want to go home." I wanted to tell him he would be fine. I wanted to say that I could save him, that everything would be okay. But I couldn't. He was beyond saving. And yet, I couldn't leave him. His words, his simple desire to go home stirred something inside me. For the first time in weeks, I found myself clinging to the idea of hope. Not for him, not for anyone, but for me. Because in that moment, I realized that if I didn't hold on to something, anything, I would lose myself too. We were all drifting, adrift in the ocean of this war, and if we didn't find something to hold on to, we'd drown. I didn't know what happened to Corporal Blake after that. I didn't stay with him long enough to see his fate. But I stayed with his words. I stayed with that tiny spark of hope. And for the first time in a long time, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could survive this. But that hope, that fragile thread, wasn't enough to save everyone. And I couldn't help but wonder, how many more times would I find myself holding on to a thread that might break at any moment? Every day felt like a battle, not just against the war, but against the very person I was becoming. I wasn't sure where the line was anymore, between the nurse who had come to help and the woman who was simply surviving. But when I looked back, I saw that I was no longer the same. I had changed in ways I couldn't fully understand, and that scared me. But perhaps the most frightening thing of all was realizing that the war had taken something I didn't even know I had. The ability to dream, to believe in something beyond the pain, the blood, the constant loss. I used to think about going home, about seeing my family again. But those thoughts became distant, like memories of a life.
The war wasn't over for me when the battle ended. It stayed with me in my dreams, in the quiet moments when no one was watching. And their faces, they stayed with me too. Some I had known for a day, some for weeks, but each one was engraved in my mind like a scar I couldn't erase. The men I had tried to save, the soldiers who had bled for something they believed in, and those who had lost everything. What were we supposed to do with that? I often wondered what legacy we were leaving behind. The generals, the soldiers, the nurses, we were all just trying to survive. But I knew now that survival wasn't the same as living. We were fighting to stay alive, yes, but were we fighting to live? Or were we fighting just to keep from being forgotten? And then one day, something shifted inside me. I realized that the legacy we leave behind isn't about the victories or the medals. It's about the stories we carry with us. It's about how we hold on to each other in the darkest of times, how we make each moment count, even when it seems like there's nothing left to give. I may never understand why I survived when so many didn't. I may never find peace with the things I saw, with the faces that haunt me in my quiet moments. But I know this: I will never forget them. And I will carry their stories, our stories, so that they aren't lost in the silence of time. The war will always be a part of me, just as it will be a part of everyone who lived through it. And maybe, just maybe, that's the only legacy we can leave. To remember, to never let it fade away.
All right, friends, I hope you've stayed with me this far because the story we just shared is important. It's not just about one person, it's about all of us. It's about the courage, the pain, the survival, and yes, the hope that still lives, even when everything around us is falling apart. What we've seen today is a reminder of what real strength looks like. It's not just about fighting battles, it's about carrying on through the toughest of times, even when it feels like the world's asking more of us than we can give.